Welcome back. When you think of the word family, what comes to mind? Um, could it be that you think of a husband and a wife and some children in a nice home with a picket fence? Well, uh, aside from the picket fence, uh, many individuals view that term exactly as we described it. But today we're going to look at a perspective that's quite different from the one that I just detailed. It's a perspective that involves only a mother and a child. So let's get into the video and let's see what insights we can draw from this particular perspective.
I chose to be a single parent. At my daughter's school, I'll get teachers that are like, so where's the dad? And I'm like, you mean the donor? And people have this look on their face like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just said it like that. And I'm like, I'm not ashamed of it. I think I come at this from a little bit different because I dealt with a really terrible co-parenting experience. I had my son in 2011, and 2 weeks after he was born, I fled an abusive relationship with him. And unfortunately, after 15 months of being in family court, my son's father killed him. When that happened to me, I wanted to eliminate the possibility of ever going back to family court. I didn't want any judge to ever tell me that I couldn't protect my child, which is essentially what happened with my son. When you become a parent, you don't stop. Even if you have a child pass away, you're still a parent. You're just a parent without a child. And so I still felt like a mother, and I was like, if I ever do this again, I will do it on my own.
Okay. So now, one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is, although Miss McLeod's story is absolutely horrendous, my heart goes out to her. But as we mentioned now, we are focusing on logically looking at the situation so as to gain some benefit from it. Ms. McLeod makes reference to this individual that she's involved in as being abusive. And so she fled as a result. But here's the question, and I think it's a question that's worth noting. Were there any signs that this gentleman was not someone that she needed to be with at all? Were there any signs before he became as abusive as he was at that point? Were there red flags that popped up that should have told her that this individual was unstable? And I use the term unstable specifically because an individual has to be of that mindset to murder their own child, regardless of the relationship that you have with the mother, regardless of what situations may be surrounding this particular child. This is your child. This is your genes being passed into the next generation. And if you don't have the love and the appreciation for this child that is a part of you, then you are indeed unstable. Let's keep going.
I grew up in a two-parent household in a Christian community where everyone was married and everyone came from a two-parent household. And I didn't really have a lot of role models growing up who were single parents. Being a single mother and also a woman of color, it was a deep concern of mine because the stigma exists. It's like, oh great, here's another one. She's probably on welfare. And I've actually had people assume that I am. I usually have to laugh and be like, okay, there's nothing wrong with being on welfare, but I'm not. When I went to have my daughter, the doctor actually looked at me and he was like, you're 33, don't you want to wait for Mr. Right? And I'm like, don't you hear me? I actually want to do this. I'm not doing this because I feel like my fertility is running out. I'm doing this because it's something I want to do. I always say to people that come up to me and they're like, oh gosh, it must be so hard being a single parent. And I have to kind of laugh because I'm like, it's hard being a parent. The more that I hear from couples, I think there's a lot of people who are in relationships who are still single parenting, but they have expectations that I don't have, and they have disappointment that I don't have as a single parent. When I come home, I can cook my own dinner, and all I have to worry about is, getting my daughter to eat her vegetables.
Okay, so now I feel it's necessary to stop again because that line of thought that Ms. McLeod has, is it logical? Is it logical? Or is this simply a deflection based upon the bad experiences that she has had with dealing with men? Now she's looking at the relationships around her of individuals who are dealing with men, and she's poking holes in those relationships. Yes, there are difficulties in any relationship, but now postponing the difficulties doesn't mean that they won't come. And that's exactly what I feel like she's doing. The approach that she's taking, even though she describes it as one that's noble and one that is going to work out good in the end, I don't think it will. I don't think it will. And we'll talk a little bit more about this after the video is over with. So let's keep going.
Being a single mother has felt so empowering to me because I feel like I was allowed to take my fertility into my own hands. You know, I didn't have to wait around for Mr. Right like the doctor wanted me to. I'm able to make choices and decisions, you know, both financially and for my child on my own. My daughter started asking, she started seeing kids in her class having siblings, and she's like, well, why don't I have one? And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I want another child. I got pregnant and I didn't tell her right away. I waited the 12 weeks. So when I finally told her that she was going to be a big sister, she was really excited about it. She hasn't stopped talking about it. She'll actually tell people, like random people on the street, like, oh, my mama is carrying my baby. I think the hardest thing for me, particularly when I had my daughter, was answering a simple question of, is she your first? Now with the little girl that I'm carrying, she's my third, but in some ways I just have two living kids. When my son died, I made a promise to him that I would never stop fighting until this didn't happen to anyone else. I consider myself a civil rights activist, especially when it comes to the protection of children. So I often will use my story to give people an example of how bad it is for kids. From day one, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write about this every single day. I'm gonna tell whoever I can. I'm gonna lobby on Capitol Hill. I stand here today and I plead with you to think about the real issue here. It's not about the rights of a father. It's not about the rights of a mother. It's about the right of a child. We're facing a crisis in our country, and kids don't have civil rights. And I think a lot of times we rely on parents to basically transfer their civil rights to their children, but that doesn't always occur. I know loads of women that come to the...
So I was waiting, but herein is the underlying trauma. Can you tell? Can you hear it in Miss McLeod's voice? The whole mindset that she has now, this campaign that she's set up on, is driven by a situation that quite possibly, and I mean no disrespect, but it quite possibly could have been prevented if she was more intentional in who she chose to procreate with. So now, as she mentioned, it's not about the rights of a father or the rights of a mother, who are individuals that are supposed to be looking after this child. A child shouldn't need rights if the parents involved are truly looking out for the welfare and the best interests of their children. But in the case that an individual is not, then should that person have been a parent in the beginning? So when you're looking at red flags, you're looking at instances where this individual has proven that they're not ready to be they're not ready for the responsibility that's required to become a parent or a father or a mother. So why put them in that situation thinking that there's something within them that's going to cause them to magically just become the parent or become the father or the mother that they're supposed to be? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And even though I have sympathy for Miss McLeod, I really do. I don't understand how it is that she can take this trauma that she's dealing with, because now notice she never mentioned anything about getting counseling. I'm sure she did, but she hasn't mentioned it in this video. And I think she feels that the best way to handle the trauma that she's had to go through is like she mentioned. She made a promise to her son that she'd never let anyone else go through that. Is that an effective way of dealing with the difficulty that she has? Maybe so. Maybe you think so. I can't say that I do. But let's keep going.
Decision to be a single parent, and we all have a different reason for doing it. I just didn't want my desire to have a children and be a mother to forcibly speed up a relationship unnecessarily, because I knew what that was like. You know, with my son's father, if I had stepped back and I had actually given the relationship time, I would have realized this is not somebody who is going to be a good father. So I didn't want that to happen again.
Bam. That's it. There's the accountability in the situation. If she had slowed down, if she had looked, if she had been more deliberate about her choice as to who this guy is that I'm going to procreate with, she would have seen the signs. She would have seen the signs. So now you're traumatized by the things that you've had to go through. But the thing about it is you don't take trauma and pass it along. Because trauma that's developed in a parent that's passed on to a child, that's a generational curse, isn't it? Isn't that how we got some of the things that we have to deal with as a community? They're passed on to us from the generation before us, and she's passing on trauma to her children. Let's keep going.
I'm also really excited to have the opportunity to raise two little girls who will see their mother as someone who goes to work, makes a good living, makes decisions on her own. I get a huge kick out of the fact that my daughter was talking to a classmate and said, the classmate was like, "Oh, there's a spider, go get daddy." And she's like, "What? Get mommy."
Okay. So now, that's the extent of the video. In conclusion, when looking at this particular segment, I couldn't help but notice that the majority of what was stated had to do with Miss McLeod herself. Throughout that segment, the majority of the time you heard her refer to herself. I, me. It was all about what she had determined to do. It was all about what made her comfortable. It was all about what she thought would be the best outcome for her daughters. But now, if that was the case, if she was genuinely concerned about the outcome of her children, then she would be open to the fact that the absence of masculinity in those girls' lives is going to manifest itself. It's going to. Because when it becomes time for her daughters to begin to procreate, to reproduce, to have children, what are they going to do? Well, they can do as they saw with their mother. They can use in vitro fertilization, and they can have a child that way. But more than not, what happens is, since an individual is not aware of what real and true positive masculinity is, then they're not going to be able to choose wisely when it comes to men. They're going to have the same difficulties that their mother had because they've not seen what true masculinity is. Listen, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what anybody thinks. There are men out there in the world who are taking their family responsibility seriously. They're taking care of the needs of their children. They're setting a good example as far as what true masculinity is all about. So we can't discount that those men exist. But the key is to recognize them. Recognize who they are. Recognize the way that they move. And the only way that you can do that ordinarily is by seeing it present in your own household, in your own home. Has anyone considered that? That maybe the absence of a father in the home, the absence of masculinity is going to cripple these children? But now, let's just look at Miss McLeod herself. And as I mentioned, we mean no disrespect, but we have to be analytical about this situation. We have to look at it for what it is and not what we would want it to be. throughout the segment, even though she never voiced her opinion in regards to what she thinks of men, it's evident that her choosing an individual that could so egregiously murder her son has totally shut her off from the possibility that there are men that will protect and provide and teach and love and bring an atmosphere into the home where individuals can thrive without the stresses and the strains that come from the outside world. She's totally blocked herself off from that. And because she's blocked herself off, as a result, the children will be blocked off. So it's important that we have this kind of discussion, because positive masculinity is something that exists. You hear so many reports of men committing heinous acts against children, heinous acts against women. But here's the thing. In any situation that a person is involved in, and I made this statement on quite a few other videos that I made, the accountability sits squarely on the shoulders of the individuals who choose to be a part of those relationships. Are you staying because you feel you can change this guy? Are you staying because you feel like you can win him over? But the logical approach to anything that's a negative and that's causing you difficulty is just simply to discard it. If she had decided to discard this first individual who she dealt with, if she had decided to discard him from the beginning, she would not have the emotional trauma that she's carrying around with her right now. And as I mentioned, she's passing that trauma on. This is a situation where we have to be careful. We have to be intentional. Because really, if this is the new way of thinking, if this is the new way to approach parenting, then basically what we're doing is destroying our community from the inside out. Those have been my thoughts. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. Be easy.